The 1990s Australian car market had never been more crowded. 10 of the ones that failed the people who bought them, counting down from 10 to 1. The one at the very top was a name Australians had trusted for nearly 40 years. In 1998, it arrived with a dashboard that cracked in the heat and a shape the decade still hasn't forgiven. That one is still ahead. Number 10. Kia Mentor, 1995 to 1999. Kia entered Australia in the mid-1990s, needing to make a specific argument that a second Korean manufacturer could build on what Hyundai had started and give Australian buyers another reason to look at the peninsula's output seriously. The Mentor was a 1.5-litre four-cylinder compact on a platform shared with the Mazda 323, priced at the affordable end of the segment. The Mazda underpinnings were reasonably sound. The build quality Kia applied around them was not. Buyers who put the Mentor alongside the 323 or the Corolla found the gap significant and not in Kia's favor. That comparison did its work across showrooms and driveways without any assistance from the press. Kia's quality eventually improved substantially. The brand it became bears almost no relationship to what the Mentor communicated about it in the mid-1990s. The next entry had been in Australia longer and managed to raise the bar for disappointment. Number 9. Hyundai Excel X3, 1994 to 2000. Hyundai had been in Australia long enough by the mid-1990s to have real expectations attached to it. The Excel X3 brought a 1.5-litre four-cylinder and pricing that undercut the Japanese competition by a meaningful margin, a genuine attraction for buyers managing their household budget carefully. The body corrosion that appeared in early Australian ownership was a specific problem for a car sold on the promise of low ongoing costs. Rust in the first few years is not the kind of thing that stays contained to one driveway, and the reliability record across X3 ownership added enough to the picture that the Japanese cars the Excel was competing against started looking considerably more attractive to anyone paying attention. Hyundai addressed the quality gap seriously and thoroughly in the years that followed. The X3 made that task harder than it should have been. The next car brought a brand new name into Australia and chose the wrong product to introduce it with. Number 8. Daewoo Cielo, 1994 to 1997. When a brand enters a new market, the first product sets the terms of the relationship before any second chance is available. Daewoo arrived in Australia with the Cielo, a 1.5-litre four-cylinder built on the Opel Kadett E platform, which had already been superseded before it reached Australian showrooms. In a market where contemporary Japanese alternatives were demonstrating what a small family car could offer in 1994, the Cielo's combination of aging architecture and the build quality buyers encountered in ownership gave the brand a starting reputation that the marketing budget couldn't counter. The Australian motoring press was direct about it. Daewoo brought better products to Australia later in the decade, but the Cielo had already been the brand's introduction and had done its work. The next car had a more credible foundation and still managed to undermine it. Number 7. Proton Persona, 1992 to 1999. The Proton Persona had architecture derived from an older Mitsubishi Lancer generation beneath its Malaysian bodywork. Familiar engineering credentials from a manufacturer with genuine standing in the Australian market, adapted for production in Kuala Lumpur. On paper, that should have been a workable starting point. The build quality Proton applied to that foundation, and the rust that arrived in Australian conditions ahead of what buyers had expected told a different story than the showroom suggested. The Lancer association was real, but it couldn't carry the Persona past what owners found in practice. Proton's footprint in Australia contracted, and the Persona became one of those cars that left the roads without the kind of ongoing owner community that keeps a model's memory alive in any positive sense. The next car arrived with considerably more brand history behind it and still found a way to waste a significant portion of it. Number 6. Rover 600, 1993 to 1999. Here is the detail most people miss about the Rover 600. The engineering foundation was the 5th generation Honda Accord. Honda supplied the platform, the layout, the structure, the mechanical base, and Rover built their own body, interior, and specific components around it, then sold the result as a European premium alternative at a price that required the Rover name to carry genuine weight. What the Rover-specific components introduced were reliability, concerns the Honda underpinnings hadn't invited. Electrics, interior trim, and finishing brought the kind of unplanned attention a car at this price level wasn't supposed to require. The buyers who purchased a 600, expecting the running character that the Honda base implied, found instead that the gap between the car's intentions and its ownership experience was noticeable and persistent. The engineering beneath it deserved better than what was built on top. The next entry had no such foundation to waste. We are halfway through. From here, the cars on this list become more specifically Australian in what they promised and who they failed. The one at number 1 is still ahead, a name that had filled Australian driveways across 4 decades, arriving in 1998 with a cracking dashboard and one of the most polarizing shapes the country had seen. Still coming. Number 5, Chrysler Neon, from 1995. The Neon arrived in Australia with a 2.0-litre 4-cylinder and positioning that asked buyers to take Chrysler seriously in the compact family segment, a considerable ask given what the Japanese manufacturers had been building toward in that category for the better part of 2 decades. Head gasket issues in Australian Neon ownership were documented widely enough across enough vehicles to describe a pattern rather than a run of individual bad luck. And a reliability pattern in a compact family car becomes the whole reputation of that product in a market where owners compare notes efficiently. Chrysler had more to offer Australia than the Neon's ownership record communicated, but the buyers who had sat with the consequences of those early failures had formed durable opinions by the time anything better arrived to argue against them. The next car failed in a way that was visible from the outside. Number 4, Ford Capri, 1989 to 1994. Ford built the Capri in Australia as a 2-seat convertible on a platform shared with the Festiva, offering a 1.6-litre engine in the standard version and a turbocharged 1.6-litre in the XR2. The concept had genuine potential, an affordable Australian-built sports car in a market with no domestic equivalent. The convertible roof was the first and most consistent problem. Water finding its way into the cabin of a car marketed specifically on the pleasure of open-air motoring was a fundamental contradiction, and enough owners found it to place it well beyond the category of isolated misfortune. The XR2's turbocharged engine brought reliability concerns of its own. Were there owners who kept an XR2 running reliably for years? There were, and they tend to be specific about what it took, but the majority experience was shorter and more expensive than that. The next car promised more and delivered a longer wait. Number 3, Holden Calibra, 1991 to 1997. The Calibra was an Opel sports coupe sold through Holden dealers, a 2.0-litre 4-cylinder or a 2.5-litre V6, with a low-drag body that turned heads in showrooms without effort. Sold in Australia in modest numbers, at a price that represented a serious commitment from the buyer. The parts situation was what unraveled it. The Calibra's Australian sales volumes were small enough that the local service and parts infrastructure never developed to match the car's needs when it required attention. Waiting for components from Germany is a patience test that the car's styling hadn't prepared owners for. The V6 developed reliability concerns that made the wait more likely and the outcome more significant. The Calibra had the appearance of a car that could have changed what Australian buyers expected from the Holden network in the sporting segment. What it changed instead was a specific set of owners' expectations about what European cars sold in modest numbers through local dealers actually cost to live with. The next 2 entries failed at something closer to home. Number 2, Mitsubishi Magna TR, 1991 to 1996. Built at Tonsley Park in Adelaide, the facility that had been producing significant Australian family cars since the Chrysler years, the TR Magna placed a 3.0-litre V6, the 6G72, under the bonnet of a family car competing directly with the Commodore and the Falcon at accessible pricing. The 6G72 is an interference engine. When the timing belt in an interference engine fails, the pistons reach the position the valves occupy, and the engine is destroyed, not damaged. Destroyed. Mitsubishi set a replacement schedule for the belt, and owners who kept to it had no problem. Owners who bought the car second-hand without accurate service history or who stretched the interval discovered the result in a single moment, usually at speed, with no warning and no gradual deterioration that would have indicated what was coming. A complete engine failure in a family car that looked from the outside identical to every other competent Australian sedan of the period is one of the harder experiences the decade produced for Australian owners. The car at number 1 tells a different kind of story, less hidden, more public, and involving a name that made the failure feel almost personal. Number 1. Ford Falcon AU, 1998 to 2002. Built at Broadmeadows in Victoria. Launched in 1998, the Falcon had been part of Australian motoring since 1960 and had built its standing across nearly 4 decades of family sedans, wagons, utes, and performance variants that gave the nameplate a depth of national familiarity almost nothing else in the market could match. The AU was presented as the most significant redesign the Falcon had seen. What it brought to that relationship was a front end that generated immediate and sustained commentary from the moment it appeared, and a dashboard that cracked in Australian heat across enough cars in enough states to become one of the decade's defining quality stories. Sales dropped significantly from the outgoing EL Falcon. Ford addressed the model's direction with the BA in 2002 and recovered much of what the AU had cost the brand. But the AU spent 4 years testing the patience of buyers who had purchased it on the strength of a nameplate that had never previously given them a reason to hesitate. That is what puts it at the top of this list. Not that it was the most mechanically dangerous car of the decade, because the Magna at number 2 makes that argument more directly. The AU Falcon is here because the Falcon had accumulated more trust from Australian families than almost any other car in the country's history, and the AU was the product that asked them to spend that trust in 1998. Some of them found a way to make their peace with it. Most of them still remember exactly how the dashboard looked by the second summer. The cars on this list range from honest failures of new brands learning what the Australian market required, to more pointed disappointments from names that had no excuse for the distance between what they promised and what they delivered. Some of the manufacturers recovered, some of the brands disappeared. The buyers who lived through the ownership experience moved on, usually towards something considerably more reliable. The 1990s Australian car market was genuinely global, genuinely competitive, and occasionally genuinely dismal. These 10 are the evidence. Which of these turned up in your experience? Bought one, drove one, watched a neighbor lose patience with one? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if Australian motoring history is what brought you here, a like and a subscribe to Sunburnt Chrome keeps it coming.